thank you for joining us. It has happened again. Today, another aerial object was shot down by U.S. warplanes.
Tonight, the growing mystery and the race to recover those unidentified objects shot down by U.S. fighter jets. Defense Secretary Austin saying today they were a threat to civilian aircraft.
Saw a white Tic Tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping pong ball. There were no rotors, no rotor wash, or any sign of visible control surfaces like wings.
So, aliens and UFOs have become the talk of the century. The once discarded topic has made headlines in America. And to add icing to the cake, officials are now warning us of alien invasions. That just goes to show that if you live long enough, you'll see everything.
These unidentified aerial phenomena have been reported for many years without explanation or deep examination by the government.
Let's begin talking about a man named Edward Snowden, because he plays a key role in today's story. Who is this person, and what does this have to do with this UFO frenzy? Well, Edward Snowden is a former CIA employee and computer intelligence consultant. He's known to the public as a whistleblower who leaked highly classified information from the National Security Agency in 2013.
The identity of the man who sent the Obama administration into defend and explain mode this week. He's an American former CIA employee that spelled out a secret surveillance program.
Edward Snowden is an American and naturalized Russian. He was born in June 1983 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Snowden's material grandfather, Edward J. Barrett, was an admiral in the U.S. Coast Guard, who later became a senior official with the FBI. He was reported to be at the Pentagon during the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Snowden's father was a warrant officer in the Coast Guard, and his mother was a clerk for the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland. So, a family of public servants. Edward Snowden must have grown up with high expectations. Maybe due to his family's high commitment to the country, Snowden felt the need to serve his nation as well. In May 2004, Snowden enlisted in the United States Army to fight in the Iraq War. Then he became a Special Forces candidate. Unfortunately, Snowden suffered from a leg injury that made it impossible for him to complete his training. In September of the same year, he was given an administrative discharge from the Army. Imagine if Snowden had completed his training with the Special Forces and continued with his military career. His life would be so different now. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In 2005, Edward Snowden was employed as a security for the University of Maryland's Center for Advanced Study of Language, a research center sponsored by the National Security Agency. A few years drifted by and Snowden was hired by Booz Allen Hamilton, an NSA contractor, in 2013. The NSA had seen Snowden's work with major corporations and organizations like Dell and the CIA. They took a liking to his work and brought him into the organization. That's how Edward Snowden went from a discharged soldier to a tech guy with the NSA, which could be considered a pretty good landing. Except, it wasn't. After many months of working for the NSA, Snowden stated that he became disappointed with the organization and its line of work.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing.
While working for the NSA, he had access to highly classified information. Snowden had major ethical concerns that he tried to address with his superiors, but all of his efforts were ignored.
He actually talks about in his book how when
Edward Snowden does.
in how when he first joined the CIA, you get access to this internal government search engine because they have their own form of Google, run by Google, and it's more anonymous than like your records pinging the server. So everyone goes and looks up things that are classified, like who killed JFK.
Snowden learned that the US government was conducting indiscriminate surveillance of phone calls, internet communications, and other electronic data of both American citizens and individuals worldwide.
Now, increasingly, we see that it's happening domestically. And to do that, the NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them. So while they may be intending to target someone associated with a foreign government or someone that they suspect of terrorism, they're collecting your communications to do so. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere.
Basically, the US government was spying on its people through electronics, which is a major violation of privacy and civil liberties. Knowing this unethical practice, Snowden decided to leak the information to the public. In May 2013, Snowden left his life behind in the United States and flew to Hong Kong. While he was there, Snowden revealed thousands of classified NSA documents to journalists Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Barton Gellman, and Ewan McCaskill. And once this information was released, it sparked an international debate between national security and privacy rights. And of course, the United States wasn't going to do nothing. On January 21, 2013, the United States Department of Justice charged Edward Snowden with 2 counts of violating the Espionage Act of 1917, and they revoked his passport. He fled the country to avoid prosecution. Snowden reported fearing for his life, not knowing what the United States government was planning for his retaliation.
And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be. You can't come forward against the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and be completely free from risk, because they're such powerful adversaries that no one can meaningfully oppose them. If they want to get you, they'll get you in time.
He flew to Moscow's Sheremetyevo International Airport, where he was restricted to the Russian airport for over a month due to his canceled passport. Finally, he was offered sanctuary in Russia with a temporary passport. Snowden was granted permanent residency in Russia in October 2020. Edward Snowden was named a whistleblower for his actions. Thanks to his actions, safety and privacy awareness were raised across the US and other countries.
I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic model.
Even though Snowden is considered a fugitive in the US, he continues to be an influential figure and media personality. He advocates for greater transparency, accountability, and protection of privacy in the digital age.
I don't have special skills. I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
In 2016, Edward Snowden became the president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco. The organization's goal is to protect journalists from hacking and governmental supervision. Though it is important to mention that Edward Snowden is a controversial figure in the public eye. Some people think of him as a heroic whistleblower who exposes the government's crimes, while others view him as a traitor and a security risk. Either way, he's pretty popular. Back to the UFO stuff. If you guys aren't up to date with the current events, there has been an obsession with UFO talk within the United States. Even government officials are talking about them now. There have been numerous news stories and hearings being held about a possible alien invasion. It's all over the news, top trending on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and every other app.
Thank you for joining us. It has happened again today. Another aerial object was shot down by U.S. warplanes.
Tonight, the growing mystery and the race to recover those unidentified objects shot down by U.S. fighter jets. Defense Secretary Austin saying today they were a threat to civilian aircraft.
Basically, the nation is in a UFO phenomenon. It's the center of everybody's attention. There's many people who are bathing in the glow of this so-called alien invasion. But there are also people like Edward Snowden who are indifferent to this information. In February 2023, Snowden had tweeted a message stating, "It's not aliens. I wish it were aliens. But it's not aliens. It's just the old engineered panic, an attractive nuisance, ensuring NatSec reporters get assigned to an investigation to investigate balloon bullshit other than budgets or bombings, a la Nord Stream." Until next time.
Something is not right. This is not about aliens at all. This is about fear so they can distract you from what's really going on.
Snowden and many others believe the UFO story is a distraction to divert everyone's attention away from the more life-threatening current events, like the Nord Stream pipelines incident. Now the Nord Stream pipeline incident is a significant occurrence that should be on the forefront of every news channel and broadcaster. It's important to mention that the Nord Stream project consists of 4 underwater pipelines that were built beneath the Baltic Sea to transport natural gas from Russia to Western Europe. The pipelines were destroyed in 2022 through a series of explosions. Many investigations were held, but no one was able to identify the true culprit behind this bombing incident. Though there are indications that the US is the one responsible for this awful act. A name you might be familiar with is Seymour Hersh. He's an American investigative journalist, known for reporting groundbreaking news reports. Seymour Hersh was born on April 8, 1937 in Chicago. His parents immigrated to the United States in the 1920s. In 1954, Hersh graduated from Hyde Park High School and attended the University of Chicago, where he graduated in 1958 with a degree in history. In 1959, he was admitted to the University of Chicago Law School, but was expelled due to poor grades. Therefore, he couldn't attain a degree in law. During the same year, Hersh worked a 7-month apprenticeship at the City News Bureau of Chicago, doing minimal tasks and kickstarting his journalism career. He enlisted in the Army Reserves in 1960 and worked in basic training at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas for 3 months. In 1961, Seymour Hersh tried to establish a weekly newspaper for Evergreen Park community called the Evergreen Dispatch, but it was short-lived. Hersh ended up moving to Pierre, South Dakota in 1962 to work for United Press International as a correspondent. Later, he moved back to Chicago in 1963 to work for the Associated Press. Then in 1965, he was transferred to their Washington, D.C. office to report on the Pentagon. He received the 1970 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. In 1969, Seymour Hersh uncovered the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War, reported the military's torture and abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib in Iraq in 2004, disclosed the bombing of Cambodia, and many more radical stories. Clearly, Hersh is a man who likes to ask the tough questions.
Seymour Hersh and his bombshell reporting on the Nord Stream pipeline that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Where'd that story go? Where's the mainstream media coverage of that story? Arguably one of the biggest stories in 100 years, that the U.S. carried out one of the biggest ecological terrorist attacks of all time.
Most recently in 2023, Seymour Hersh once again made a controversial allegation, claiming that the U.S. is responsible for the Nord Stream pipeline's bombing, which has roused up all kinds of dispute. Of course, the White House completely dismisses Hersh's claims. Seymour Hersh believes that the U.S. government's motive behind the sabotage was to retaliate against Russia.
There was a committee set up. Jake Sullivan was directly involved. He was the national security advisor, still is. They set up a team to look at options about how to put pressure on the Russian government to back off. The bombs were put in there under the cover of a NATO exercise. There were a lot of different countries running around with divers and blowing up things. It was an exercise to go find and chase mines. So in that exercise, the divers went down, did what they were trained to do. They're very good. C4, a couple hundred, whatever the weight is, bombs enough to blow up most cities, most buildings in Washington, and maybe some in New York. Anyway, they did their job, but the president at the last minute hesitated.
This can be very crucial as it affects everyone on a national level. If what Hersh said was true, the US can suffer major consequences for their actions. Because let's be honest, the United States is nowhere near on good terms with Russia, China, or the Middle East. Do they seriously want to upset the rest of the world? Those who agree with Seymour Hersh and Edward Snowden have reasons to believe that the US was behind the Nord Stream incident. Therefore, they needed cover to help redirect the people's attention elsewhere. So, they created a false UFO sighting to distract the majority from what's really important.
The president also instructed the intelligence community to take a broad look at the phenomenon of unidentified aerial objects. Indeed, President Biden conducted the first ever daily intelligence briefing session devoted to this phenomenon back in June of 2021. He was briefed that this is not just an issue for the United States, but one for the rest of the world. And as I said, our friends and our partners are dealing with this as well.
According to the White House's John Kirby, this phenomenon that deals with the unidentified aerial objects, or so-called UFOs, has been a subject of discussion with US government officials. They literally only ever addressed it once every other presidential term. So it would be fair to say that the circumstances in which the White House and every aspect of the US government are promoting this UFO story could be considered suspicious. In all honesty, this is the time for sci-fi and extraterrestrial enthusiasts to go wild. Because how many more times in this decade will the US government hold press conferences and hearing about alien invasions on TV? How many times do you see a reporter or journalist question the president about potential UFO sightings without getting humiliated? It goes without saying. UFOs used to be a forbidden word in news, media conferences, and anywhere formal, simply because the idea of UFOs has been disregarded as insane. Suddenly, aliens and UFOs are not a joke anymore. Now the topic is being promoted everywhere by government officials. Clearly, they want the UFO headlines to stick. There's plenty of whistleblowers who are all about proving the existence of UFOs, and they're ready to step up and speak about them in public.
But from my personal experience, we were seeing objects on a daily basis that we couldn't attribute to any of our assets, our technology, or our capabilities.
First of all, our military is encountering vehicles that far surpass the capabilities of our own frontline aircraft. They're operating on a persistent basis in restricted military airspace. Sometimes they're jamming the sensors on our aircraft. So obviously this is far more concerning than lumbering Chinese balloons.
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah, non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And if what Edward Snowden says is true, the US federal government will continue to promote it senselessly because they prepared for it. It's theorized that the United States Authority has so many secrets. Therefore, they need a list with just as many diversions to cover up their wrongdoings. Snowden described it as a perfect excuse.
The perfect boogeyman, because you're not going to have independent media to be able to verify aliens, because none of us can go to space. So it's like they can create the perfect enemy. It's the perfect boogeyman for the next move, because like then they can get unlimited funds, because they can, you know, the photoshopping its spacecraft will be easy for propaganda. So it's like it's like the perfect next step with what we've seen.
They need to keep building up the fear of these UAPs. Next step is really for the UAPs to start shooting down our commercial airliners and our military jets from the skies. And that, I believe, is going to be happening very, very soon.
Another famous whistleblower who has much influence in the alien invasion conspiracy case is a former FBI agent named John D'Souza. D'Souza is a retired FBI agent who specializes in counterterrorism and paranormal cases. He's currently the author of many best-selling books inspired by his paranormal career.
I also worked all the big counterterrorism cases as well. That was kind of like my major, while paranormal was kind of my minor.
Some of his books include Clear Hearers and Para-Investigators, all centered around supernatural and mysterious cases John D'Souza has encountered in his line of work. An interesting fact about John D'Souza is that his career is a real-life version of the show The X-Files. If you've never heard of The X-Files, it's one of the longest-running science fiction TV series in the United States.
Several of my stories were taken by a show that was going on the air at that time. For about a year. It was called The X-Files.
The show features FBI agents investigating unsolved cases involving paranormal and unexplained events. The cases contain elements like government conspiracies, supernatural occurrences, and UFO sightings. The first season of the show aired in 1993, and it was actually based on the real cases that John D'Souza worked on in the FBI. So the next time when you're watching The X-Files, you know that the show is based on real-life FBI cases. The former agent had made an impact when he spoke out against the Chinese balloon incident in early 2023. He predicted that the US government would release a false alien invasion story to mislead their people. In an interview with Redacted, John D'Souza explained how he managed to predict the UFO hoax before it happened, using a system he called raw data and rumors.
And so we have a way of sharing information to each other, which is through something called raw data and rumor, so that we are not violating any secrecy, we're not violating any top secret sort of prohibitions. So we're able to talk to each other about rumors, about things that may possibly be true.
Additionally, John D'Souza cautioned the viewers and listeners to beware of buzzwords like UAPs, learn to identify deceptions, take sight onto the polycrisis around you, and most importantly, protect yourselves. Much like Seymour Hersh and Edward Snowden, John D'Souza believed that the UFO sightings and alien invasion stories are distractions to divert everyone's attention away from the rising tensions between the United States, China, and Russia. It's a split battle between those who trust and don't trust the US government. Though, we have to make it very clear that even though people like Seymour Hersh, Edward Snowden, John D'Souza, and even Clayton Morris, a former Fox News anchor and the current host of Redacted, are speaking against the promoted UFO stories, they are not saying that UFOs are a hoax or fake. Many people who are speaking out against the story are labeled as non-believers of aliens and UFOs, but that's not the case. What people like Edward Snowden are trying to say is that the US government is lying to its people, and the Chinese balloon and UFO stories are a form of deception. Not all of them, but most of the people who called this story a hoax remain open-minded about extraterrestrial existence. Edward Snowden recorded his book about experience with handling classified information during his time with the NSA. Snowden said he knew no aliens had yet contacted Earth.
He says, as far as I could tell, aliens have never contacted Earth, or they haven't contacted U.S. intelligence.
Clayton Morris had covered a story about UFOs over 10 years ago when he was still working with Fox. He interviewed pilot Andy Danziger about his experience with potential UFOs in 1989.
This pilot, though, who flew Barack Obama during his 2008 presidential campaign, says UFOs are real and he's seen one firsthand. Here to share his almost unbelievable stories, pilot Andy Danziger. Nice to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Now, we should be clear that this incident that you saw happened in 1989. Why did it take so long for you to talk about it?
John D'Souza has actual run-ins with former FBI cases that document supernatural cases dealing with extraterrestrial sightings. He has even written about them in his best-selling books.
Alien visitors and UFOs are not physical in the way that we are. They are just not physical. And that's something I first learned from the FBI.
So no, people who are against the promotion of this story doesn't necessarily mean they're against the idea of aliens, UFOs, or extraterrestrials. Now, the idea of whether UFOs and aliens actually exist, that's an entirely different conversation. No one can confirm that extraterrestrials exist, but at the same time, no one can say that they don't exist. So it's good to keep an open mind about the subject. It is up to each individual to decide how they want to approach the situation. Do tell us about your thoughts on this alien invasion news story. And if you have any paranormal stories to share, feel free to do so. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications.